following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
GRTiQ podcast.
Welcome to the GRTiQ podcast. Today is part 2 of our 2-part look back on the guests, ideas, and stories shared on the GRTiQ podcast in 2023. This is our 3rd consecutive year of producing a best of episode series, and I just want to say thank you to all the amazing guests who joined the podcast during 2023, and to all of you, the loyal listeners who make this podcast possible. Thank you. During this episode, you'll hear excerpts from episode 123 through episode 148. We'll be back with new episodes of the podcast to start off 2024. Until then, please enjoy part 2 of the best of 2023.
Episode 123.
Starting us off from episode 123, here's GJ Flannery from Metrics DAO, a DAO that connects Web2 data analysts with blockchain projects. This is GJ sharing his perspective on the Graph's commitment to decentralization.
Yeah, it's pivotal. I had a friend say to me about gaming earlier this week, if you're not having fun, why even bother? If you're not here to decentralize, why even bother? You can get data from Amazon or whoever you want. If we're not here to empower users with the ability to access things to make their lives better without seeking permission from a gatekeeper, then we shouldn't even be in the space. There are other good reasons, but you have to at least care about that a little bit, in my view. It's that or speculation. Those are the reasons to be in crypto, and the fun and the memes and the community. So there are the good reasons. But if you don't actually fundamentally believe and aren't willing to put at least a little bit of skin behind making it possible for people to conduct their information business and their financial business in a different way than what we've already got, then, maybe you're in the wrong kitchen. I think for the graph, there's a question of putting your money where your mouth is. Are you actually building infrastructure that enables this and that enables builders to be able to, one, to afford, I think first and foremost, but two, to actually functionally be able to build? That's critical. I think the graph has been a pioneer in making this happen and thus empowering builders who are going to make the products and services that are going to bring in the next wave and make all of this 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times bigger than it is. So I'll reiterate what I said before. Gratitude, especially speaking from a place of some knowledge. Data is super, super hard. The graph makes it easier.
Episode 124.
And now Anna Maria Kalin from episode 124. Anna's a senior software engineer at GraphOps, one of the core dev teams working on the graph. This is Anna talking about how going to work on a core dev team has changed her perspective on the graph and Web3.
So I had various chances to meet the brains behind the graph protocol. And I can say without a shadow of the doubt that these are some of the smartest people I've ever had the opportunity to be in a room with. Just to give you an example, many of the core dev members are very much into philosophy. And at some of the core dev retreats, we'd hold philosophy nights as well. And that to me signals an ability for consideration and for assessing many different sides of a problem before committing to a solution. In addition to that, the amount of work and effort that the different teams put into contributing to the graph ecosystem, as well as the amount of engagement most indexers have with the graph, are truly things that make me believe in the work we're doing. And again, I have not been very good at keeping up with the whole development of Web3 outside of the graph, but I get the sense that people across the world are losing faith into the economical and political systems that are meant to protect and govern us fairly. And I think, if nothing else, this is something that can play to the advantage of Web3 solutions.
Episode 125.
For episode 125, we welcome Sebastian Bruegel, founder at Hopper, a decentralized incentivized mixnet that takes privacy to a whole new level. Here, Sebastian talks about how important the graph is for what Hopper's building.
Two things. So first of all, we are active users of the graph. So if you are using Hopper tokens, chances are you stake your Hopper tokens. We have also some, community NFTs. So for some community activities, you can earn some NFTs, which you use in our staking ecosystem. And it's a website called stake.hoppernet.org, which is heavily using the graph in order to render absolutely everything. It's kind of your gateway to the Hopper ecosystem. If you want to run a node, you go to stake.hoppernet.org. Really fun web front end. Now, that's not just a web front end. That is actually loading data from the graph. And that's what we are actively using. So really, we're using subgraphs for a whole bunch of things in the Hopper ecosystem that we're leveraging. And the second thing is, how do I, foresee the graph using Hopper? The graph is actually trying to decentralize, right? And trying to properly decentralize, which I find absolutely amazing and very, very laudable. Now, again, for the graph, and this is not specific about the graph, right? So I'm not picking on the graph. This is a general problem in the Web3. Every infrastructure that is decentralized has a bigger privacy problem than the centralized counterpiece. So the decentralized version of the graph, you have the indexers and the users. These two have to be protected. I, as a user, do not want to leak my queries to, some antagonistic individual who might be data harvesting me, who might want to front run me and understand what I'm doing in the Web3. So that's why I see a private version of the graph. Not tomorrow, that's still going to be a bit further out, but eventually I want the graph to be privacy preserving for the users, which is especially important in a truly decentralized version of the graph. So it's, I would say, a mutually beneficial collaboration and partnership.
Episode 126.
And now from episode 126, this is Mabel Jiang, Chief Revenue Officer at Find Satoshi Lab and member of the Graph Council. Here, Mabel thinks back to the time when she first became aware of the graph and what her first impressions were of the problem the protocol sought to solve.
So it's actually as simple as blockchain is decentralized ledger. There's naturally going to be a lot of stats or whatever being stored, like data on top. So you then really just need an indexer and something that you can sort out all the how the information were arranged and placed and displayed and this and that. So one article that really impacted me quite a bit it's one article by USB that wrote about different phases of protocols and applications in history. And really the idea is that if you have a platform full of information, the next natural thing you should think about is about how you sort and curate those information. It's as simple as that. So I think going back to the history of the internet, you are seeing a lot of these different apps being built on top. But at the end, is really how you are using human information and all kinds of data being stored on the open web, and then curate them and to allow those information to be more easily consumed and accessed by users. So something like the graph at that time, when nobody can imagine what people can be doing with blockchain, that just become absolutely important, because I think I kind of like to use a very first principle way of thinking, which is even if you don't know what apps are going to be built on top of blockchain or use blockchain, at least this tool is, regardless what is being built, this is going to be used. So that's when it comes to the graph or similar type of things that I would think of. This is absolutely going to be the layer that people would need to use, the indexing layer. But who's going to be building it? Whoever the first may just have the most mind share. And I think that is graph right now.
Episode 127.
This is Alex Shaw, CEO at Tenderize, a liquid staking solution. During episode 127, Alec answered the question about how Tenderize uses and relies upon the graph.
So our system, as mentioned, it's 100% permissionless, and we're trying to make this thing an unstoppable piece of infrastructure. So with that being said, everything on our front end is powered by the graph. So all of our live data dashboards, if you want to track exactly where your stake is at any given time, say you want to validate whether or not the system is solvent, i.e., is there enough stake representing all of the liquid staking tokens that we have in the market? We use the graph for all of that, simply so you as a user, you don't have to trust me. You don't have to trust Nico. You don't have to trust anyone. You can trust the integrity of the code and how we built the system.
Episode 128.
In episode 128, we were joined by Jamie Herrero from Masari. Here, I asked Jamie about subgraphs becoming the industry standard for accessing blockchain data, as well as his perspective on the announcement and release of Substreams-powered subgraphs.
Yes. So graphs, as we were mentioning before, they are like the entry point for someone wanting to index or observe something happening on some protocol, some application. And they're relatively easy to get started with. So that might be the reason why they've just become like standard, or at least default for every application to use. But as you start building, at Masari, we've built many of them, right? And they get more and more ambitious. We want to track more and more data, more and more details, or protocols with this activity, or all these details, and all these many things. At some point, if the protocol is too active, like you could say Uniswap V2 that has had lots of swaps, right? And you make us a graph to start indexing it, it just takes too long. It's what we were mentioning earlier, that you would get to this website and you would see a warning saying, oh, graph node is behind so many blocks. So this is what happens. You develop your graph, you deploy it, and then until you can use it with today's data, it might take a short amount of time or a longer amount of time, depending on what you're doing and the protocol you're working with. And one of the problems we've hit is certain protocols take too long. So you could say like 3 months, 4 months. And if you have to do any change to it, you have to just start over. Substreams aims to resolve that. So if you can just shorten that cycle, you can index a high activity protocol super fast in, like, say, a few hours, or even if it's 1 day, it's already pretty fast compared to subgraphs. And if you combine it with subgraphs themselves and how they become the go-to for the industry, then you have like a winner product, right? Like it could be easy to onboard, it could be fast to index something, and you have like all the network effect from the graph itself and the decentralization from the decentralized network. I know there's potential there. There's something there.
Episode 129.
From episode 129, this is Marcus Rain, Developer Success and Relations at Edge and Node, one of the core dev teams working on the graph. Marcus has been active in the graph community for a long time, so I asked him what is something he learned new about the graph community by virtue of his new role in joining Edge and Node.
Yeah, I really I'm learning so much about the incentivization of the entirety of crypto, where it comes to data and what that does, almost like kind of a moth to a light, where data is on tap at the graph. And so when we get people who are developing using subgraphs, now using substreams, when we get people coming into this ecosystem, they're typically very curious people, and I get along very well with curious people. So I'm able to immediately hop into, oh man, what kind of data are you looking for? What's interesting to you? And then they come to me and they tell me the exact specifications and all these interesting things they're doing with it. And once again, my mind is blown. I'm like, I would have never have known that or thought to have done that. But I'm just entranced. I'm just, oh my gosh, teach me more, keep talking. And so when people are building on the graph, I very quickly meet people that I am interested in continuing the conversation with, and then fascinated with how they're using the data in a way that interests them, which then in part interests me. Just really cool people who are all around this ecosystem, in the ecosystem all the time.
Episode 130.
This is Matthew Darwin from episode 130, Chief Infrastructure Officer at Pinax, a new core dev team at the Graph. Here, Matthew talks about what Pinax will contribute and prioritize in their new role as core devs working on the Graph.
As you said, we've been around for a little while. we started working on Firehose and substreams, when to introduce it to the indexer community. So the focus has really been understanding all the latest changes, Firehose substreams. How does that integrate with the graph node? All the different components of the graph. How does all of this stuff work together? And then I've done a lot of Q&A sessions inside the indexer office hours. That's what we've been doing up to now. That will continue. Right, so that's really the foundational piece of what Pinax is contributing to the graph ecosystem. So more Firehose, more substreams, more blockchains, all that stuff would just keep growing that. The thing that we've been working on more recently, and one of our team members, Yarrow, was recently on Builder office hours, and he showed, hey, here's how you use actual substreams as from a developer point of view. So we're going to spend a lot more time building tools to make it easier to use substreams. So up till now, it's been about how do we run substreams as an indexer. Now it's, as developers, how do you use substreams? So we're going to expand in that space. That means writing more example code, doing demos, podcasts, showing up at conferences, these kinds of things. So it's all around Firehose and substreams, what we're doing inside Pinax, and we'll just keep expanding that scope depending on whatever is needed at the time.
Episode 131.
From episode 131, we welcome Marek Olszewski, CTO at C Labs, president of Valora, and co-founder at Cello. This is Marek talking about how important decentralized infrastructure is, like the graph, for developers building in Web3.
I think it's really important to devs. I think this is why we're all here. I think really the graph deserves a lot of credit, I would say. Taking a piece of infrastructure that, could have had a business model as a centralized offering, but really taking a step further and saying, no, let's really turn this into a decentralized protocol. I think that's incredibly, both exciting, but also, at the time when this first was announced, that was like a bold move, I would say. And it's one that also, the broader ecosystem, graph ecosystem, executed really well on. It was so nice to see, the Cello support transition from kind of the centralized offering to the decentralized offering. And, I like to say that, most end users probably don't care too much about decentralization, but the developers serving them typically care a lot. And so it just makes sense that the developers building web apps, when thinking about what kind of indexing solutions they need, would gravitate towards a decentralized offering. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important.
Episode 132.
From episode 132, here's Kevin Jones, developer relations engineer at Edge and Node. This is Kevin sharing what makes him excited about the future of the graph.
Obviously, as we speak today, the graph has a very powerful decentralized network. We're starting to see every day that new dApps are coming onto the network, new chains are coming onto the network. And we're also, like I said before, we're seeing a lot of improvements around the protocol, and there's a lot of just collaboration going on. So I'm very optimistic for the graph, and I really am excited to see as more dApps and protocols build on the network, just seeing like them kind of have this light bulb moment where like using the graph is just going to make things a lot easier for them. And so, yeah, I'm bullish on the graph, and I'm really excited because I think it has a very, very strong community as well. And that's one of the things I always look at with any protocol is like, how is the community? And the graph community is very strong.
Episode 133.
And now here's Anton Gaev, product manager at P2P, one of the largest indexers at the graph. During episode 133, Anton talked about his experience going to work at the graph and working alongside other indexers within the indexer community.
Well, it was fascinating to say the least. Obviously, it was very exciting to get this, let's call industry giant, and to work in the graph with their very high-value portfolio. So it's a bit hard to see that P2P is being criticized for us threatening the decentralization within the graph. But at the same time, we really try to reduce our share. At least we try not to be active in terms of sales. And still we try to contribute into other things. And it is a very good feeling when the people, the community recognizes all the good things that we're trying to do. So in general, I think that the indexers community especially is quite friendly, especially from my experience with other projects, and very professional. So I really see people that feel passion for the work they are doing and that really want to make the graph better. And it's an honor to be among those people, and you just get the same feeling from them, and you want to contribute just by participating in all those calls and by seeing the desire in the chats that happening in Discord or Telegram. Yes, it's one of the healthiest community, let's say, in the Web3 space. So yes, I'm honored to be here.
Episode 134.
For episode 134, we welcomed Ben Jones, director at the Optimism Foundation, one of the visionary co-founders behind Optimism. This is how Ben answered the question about whether or not a data and indexing layer like the graph is necessary for Web3.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say yes, 100%. You know, like indexing is a very important thing, even in Web 2. It's just like one of the fundamental building blocks of applications, period, not just Web 3 applications, to be able to like basically efficiently cache and track data that is an aggregate of much larger amounts of data that you don't have to constantly go and recompute, right? So like this problem statement of like, oh, we want to calculate the total trading volume of all time, but that's not tracked in the smart contract. You have two options. Either every time you're requested for that information, you go back and through every single transaction that's ever happened and add up all the volumes together to get your answer every single time, or you have some sort of intermediary that's caching the current volume, and every time a new transaction comes along, it adds that to the cumulative and deletes it. That notion of like indexing and caching is not just for Web 3 scalability, but for Web 2 scalability, like a key stalwart building block. So yeah, 100%, super important.
Episode 135.
Pedro Diogo from the Graph Foundation joined us for episode 135. Here, Pedro talks about working in Web 2, becoming familiar with the graph, and then using it for his projects long before ever making the full-time move into Web 3 and going to work at the Graph Foundation.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, it goes back to the efficiency. As a developer, or if you're building something that uses Ethereum, you need APIs. And so the graph gives you that like automatically. You need only to focus on your smart contracts, right? And then if you use the graph, then all the data you need to build your application will be available in a GraphQL sort of way. So you have a proper query language to step into your data and do queries on it. I don't even think that the Web3 space would have evolved as quickly as it did without the graph. So we felt it at UbiWare, like, oh, this is way easier. This is like, now I have APIs. Now I can build the front end. Now I can build the mobile apps. That's super useful. And I think the whole DeFi space during the early years when the graph came out, they also noticed it. Like a lot of things got shipped during that time because, developers could ship it faster. I don't think the space would have evolved so quickly if we didn't have the graph. So it's a major important piece of software we currently have, allowing developers and entrepreneurs to just build and ship things a lot faster and more efficiently.
Episode 136.
During episode 136, we were joined by Terry Blau, co-founder and COO at Playgrounds, a data solutions company leveraging the graph to provide on-chain data infrastructures and services for data teams, analysts, and engineers. This is Terry talking about how important the graph is for Web3 and answering the question if Web3 can exist without something like the graph.
I don't think so. Like if we draw a comparison with the traditional world, when a company goes through its financial operations, it's essentially dealing with two separate systems. On one hand, they use the banking system to like actually perform the payments and move money around. But on the other hand, you have the accounting world where they deal with the receipts, invoices, and all that kind of stuff. But both really don't speak to each other. And so that's why like there's an entire aspect of accounting that is dedicated to essentially reconcile both. And if we bring that back to blockchain, you can imagine that it's essentially having the banking system, but without the accounting, and so there's no real way to actually understand what is happening and how we got there without something like the graph to make all of the current state of blockchain, but especially its history, available to anyone.
Episode 137.
From episode 137, this is Sahaj Preet with the Guild, another core dev team working on the graph. Here, Sahaj talks about the Guild and the team and some of the things they're working on and prioritizing as they contribute to the protocol.
So, as a Guild, we're a group of open source developers. That's what got us all together. We're a group of open source developers. We maintain a lot of projects in the GRAPHQL ecosystem, and then we do like whatever we do is like open and public. We have a SaaS product that we're running today. It's all public. Anyone can use the SaaS offering, or they're free to just to run that SaaS offering themselves. So we really believe in open source. That's what got us who we are today. And then what do we do at the Graph? We focus a lot on like developer tooling and like the developer experience building on the Graph, and like the experience like just interacting with the Graph, right? There are like other teams making ways to go subgraphs fast, reading the data on the blockchain faster. Like if you know about streaming fast, they're building like ways, how can we read the blockchain data faster? But like what we're trying to do is like giving you a way to read all that data that they stored in the database. So that's where the GraphQL layer comes in. So we add features to the GraphQL layer, like security things that we can do to improve the graph. But the other part is like, building subgraphs. Like a lot of people building on the graph are building subgraphs. So like, how can you like make a good developer experience for them? So we work on like, the CLI tooling or building dApps around the graph. Like the whole point using the graph is like, you can build a decentralized dApp, meaning like if one API goes down, you can use another API, right? So with multiple subgraphs running on multiple indexers, so we have this tool called the Graph Client. So Graph Client makes it easier for anyone to use the graph and like get all the features that we have to offer in the decentralized network.
Episode 138.
And now Isaac Prada with Radiant from episode 138. Isaac is the Director of Communications and Project Management at Radiant Capital, a pioneering DeFi solution facilitating cross-chain lending and borrowing of assets with the ambitious mission of becoming the first omni-chain money market. This is Isaac talking about how Radiant uses the graph and why the graph is important for developers building in Web3.
Coming back to my Formula One background, it's like the most efficient way that we know of getting our telemetry. So getting all our data from, in this case, the blockchain, from the chain. We're operating on BNB and on Arbitrum. We are launching shortly on mainnet, on Ethereum. So basically, whenever you have to access data on chain, there are several ways. And what we found is that the graph is the most efficient way for us in terms of currently decentralization, uptime, in terms of cost. And basically that means that our front end gets fed with all this data coming from the graph. And we recently moved to the Graph Decentralized Network. And that was a great move because actually the graph had a maintenance downtime, very small one recently. And we were planning on, okay, what's the impact going to be of this downtime, maintenance program downtime to our front end and to our app in general. And our devs had been able to move to the decentralized version before the maintenance window. And when the maintenance window had happened, we had that backup plan, but nothing happened on our front end. And some of our C-level guys asked, why did nothing happen? Well, because the devs had managed to move on to the decentralized version. So we realized the power, of course, of being decentralized and backed by many nodes and all the whole decentralized version of the graph. So that's basically a quick recap of the value that we find in Radiant for the graph, and especially for the decentralized network.
Episode 139.
From episode 139, this is Antoine Chavron, CEO and co-founder at UNCX Network, a pioneering provider of DeFi services known for its innovative and automated token solutions. Here, Shav talks about how important the graph is for UNCX.
So the usage of the graph, and especially of the subgraphs, for us was a natural step towards the decentralization related to data access. Because we have our products, we have our UI, but we also have integration on different platforms that are either charting platforms, portfolio trackers, analytics platforms, and so on and so forth. And before using the graph, we were basically providing these additional platforms with APIs related to our data, but they were like APIs that we would control. And I think I was specifically challenged. We had the chance to talk in Croatia. It was a conference called Block Split last year. And I was explaining to someone in the room that we would be able to provide CoinGecko in that matter with data that would come from our API and that would reflect either liquidity logs or token vesting, like basically to make sure that we were precise for calculating circulating supplies, which is, in my opinion, very important, right? And this person replied to me like, why would we trust your API? And I was like, but my services decide. No, she had a point. She had a point. And so after this episode and a bunch of others, like for example, downtime and all this stuff, we were actively looking for how to decentralize data sources that we have and how to provide these similar platforms with data of ours, which we argue that this is relevant data, especially for token vesting and liquidity locking. And that's when the graph team last year came in. I think we met with especially some people of the graph team last year in Paris in Ethereum EFCC conference, and we had a very nice contact. Like actually, thanks to the graph team, we had like a not only just professional but also a personal, very nice moments with the team. It was nice to discover who is behind the ecosystem, and then we basically started to build subgraphs for our partners that use our data, that consume our data, and also for the app of our own. So we migrated recently our app, which was powered by centralized APIs of ours, to a new version. And this new version leverages subgraphs to basically offer our users the data that comes from our lockers or our vesting solutions. So we deployed a lot of subgraphs, not just for our own usage as a platform, but also for the third parties that were relying on our centralized APIs, but to use the GRT ecosystem subgraphs instead. So I think one notable integration that you probably know and the community probably knows is DEX tools. So the next time you open DEX tools and you see this sweet little green unicorn next to the token pair, which indicates that the liquidity is locked. As of now, when the pair is on Uniswap v3, the data comes from a subgraph, and they're currently working on the integration of the V2 liquidity logs using the data that comes from subgraphs. So it's not just us; it's also the members of our integrated platforms or these companies that leverage our data. They're going to use and leverage the data from subgraphs. So that means, I guess it's nice for both indexers and traders of these subgraphs, because you can expect the usage to go wider as we also provide more subgraphs, because we started with the liquidity lockers, but we also have the vesting subgraphs that are out there, and we plan to keep basically deploying subgraphs for all the services we have. So that means the token minter as in the token generator, the launchpad, and the contracts that are related to staking and farming. Basically, instead of having centralized APIs, we want to decentralize everything through the graph, the subgraph network. Ideally, completely outside of the hosted service. But, for example, if I take BNB chain, some of them are still only available on the hosted service, if I'm not mistaken. But we're leveraging the decentralized network as much as possible. Yeah, that's how we leverage the graph and the subgraph network.
Episode 140.
And now episode 140 with Colson, Graph Advocate and member of Graph Advocates DAO. This is Colson talking about the Graph Advocates, explaining what they're like and what they're contributing to the ecosystem.
Oh, it's amazing. We have a lot, as you said, a lot of Graph Advocates now from all time zones. We are over 300, and the last time I checked, it was about 64 different countries. So that's amazing to see. And a lot of these Graph Advocates are also involved in other communities. So whenever we go to an event or there's an event happening that is big, there is usually one or more Graph Advocates there. And it makes a lot of easier collaboration as well, because they are already involved in their own communities. So besides the Graph community growing a lot, and especially not only the advocate, but also all of the core developers and all of the grantees, and it's a very big ecosystem. And then on top of that, all of the local communities that these advocates are involved in, It's crazy. Like every event that we go to, it's 5 or more graph advocates that are doing an amazing job. And it's just very, very cool to see. From the start, where we had, I think, 30, which are now the Advocates DAO members, to growing to 300. It's been a very interesting experience, super exciting, sometimes a little bit hard, but overall, really, really fun.
Episode 141.
During episode 141, Esther Wu joined us, another member of Graph Advocates and Graph Advocates DAO. During her interview, Esther shared her journey into Web3, and here she talks about how she found her place in the graph ecosystem despite coming from a non-technical background.
Yeah, that's a great question. So at first glance, even for me, when I started to learn about crypto and blockchain, I'm like, how does a non-technical person ever even think about getting involved? I myself had a hard time, even when I was learning about the graph. I wanted to engage and try to contribute somehow, but didn't know which path to take or how to do that. And what I found as I was gaining more experience, whether it was with the graph community or other communities that I also tried to immerse myself in, I realized that community is so important because it's the people and the interactions you make that help grow the Web3 ecosystem. And to that end, I feel we've seen more and more DAOs appearing. And I think when you think about a decentralized organization like DAOs are, you really feel that sense of like-minded folks coming together. And as I saw, for instance, the Advocates program and other DAOs appearing, I started to realize how important and vital communities are, and that interaction, networking, building relationships. So I do feel that communities are the way to help grow the Web3 ecosystem.
Episode 142.
And now here's Tegan Klein from episode 142, CEO and co-founder at Edge and Node. This was Tegan's second interview with the GRTiQ podcast, and it was her first podcast since becoming the CEO at Edge and Node. Here, Tegan talks about the recent release of the Graph's new roadmap called New Era and what it means for the future of the Graph.
Yeah, it's a really exciting future. I think that the Graph has kind of cracked the code. As I mentioned, decentralization is not sexy. It takes time. But one thing that the Graph ecosystem, and credit to the foundation on this, is bringing in these core developers so that each company can focus on a different segment. And because of that, we're able to think about the new world of data services. So going after all data, LLMs are one example. We're also going after SQL, bringing that into the Graph ecosystem, allowing indexers to organize that kind of data. This way, the Graph can kind of be the one-stop shop for all of your data needs, all of anyone's data needs. And what's important is that the data is organized in a decentralized way so that no one company controls that data or can manipulate that data. And we have over 200 indexers on the Graph network. All are independent companies, organizations, individuals around the world organizing that data. And I always have called them the backbone of Web3 because they truly are kind of the backbone of this ecosystem, of this space. And as a delegator, you can delegate to support these indexers, get them additional GRT so that they can continue organizing the world's data.
Episode 143.
And here from episode 143 is Mickey Nagas, engineering manager at Edge and Node. During the interview, Mickey talked about her vision for how the Graph evolves into something more than it is today. Here's Mickey's answer when I asked her to expand on this observation and share more about this future that she envisions.
It's a challenging question to answer. I think the future is pretty unknowable, but I think what really sets the Graph apart and why I think it'll be the platform that any dApp will build on in the future is because we are decentralized. So if any one core developer ceases to exist, your life doesn't change a whole lot. Versus if you have all of your data with a centralized indexing company, that's not true. You'll be locked in, you've gotten in bed with them, and they really own your data. So I think that is a huge differentiator. But also, I do see the Graph extremely well positioned to anticipate our users' needs or to hear their complaints and build out data services or features that suit their needs. So for example, we heard the need for an NFT use case. and we built out file data sources to meet users' needs. Do you see any of our competitors doing that? No. And I think those factors together make us extremely well suited to become really the obvious choice for all dApps in the future.
Episode 144.
From episode 144, this is Ani Patel, Senior Research Scientist at Semiotic Labs, one of the other core dev teams working on the graph. Here's Ani's response to being asked about the new product, Agent C, that the team at Semiotic recently released, a product that brings the power of AI and LLMs to the graph.
Agent C is Semiotic's new product. I mentioned before the relationship between reinforcement learning and intents in the DeFi or MEV space, just about how similar they are. Also, let me actually back up a step and just give a quick definition of intents in case people are not familiar with that term. So an intent basically refers to a user being able to specify a desired outcome or goal in natural language, so English or whatever language, rather than specifying sort of the steps that they want to take in order to reach that goal. And so you might think about these steps as being various things. It could be some code, it could be API calls, it can be making a swap via Odos or Uniswap or whatever. And so in the blockchain or Web3 context, intents allow users to express what they want to accomplish on chain without having to dive into sort of the exact details of the underlying transaction. And so let's say in the graph context, a delegator could express their desire to delegate. And many of the technical steps could be solved for them using solvers, such as finding the best indexer for them. And then agents, which is, for example, setting up the transactions that you need to execute in order to delegate to someone. So you could think about it as simple as you might type in a sentence, I have this much GRT that I'd like to delegate. Please find me an indexer and set up that delegation for me. So we at Semiotic, we really want to enable this. I think we're well placed to do this, right? So we have, of course, AI expertise. I mentioned Sam and I both have reinforcement learning backgrounds. Dimash, who's another AI expert within our space, also a co-guest on GRTiQ with me and Sam last time. His background is in AI language models, so more along the LLM space, let's say. We have SQL experts with decades of experience. We have strong software engineers, cloud experts, and Web3 maximalists who sort of understand what the community is going towards, what Web3 sort of fundamentally should mean, what we need to embody within our product to be a part of the Web3 space. And of course, not least, we have the support of the graph and its community. So the end goal, again, is for agency to move towards intents, but currently we're focused on what is the simplest problem of value we can solve. And the simplest problem is just taking your natural language question, converting it to SQL, and then creating some sort of plot or figure from that data so that you can look at that and get some understanding about what that data means. So it gives you the information of a dashboard with the flexibility of a chatbot. We first wanted to experiment with DeFi. We support Uniswap v2 and v3, also Uniswap vx as of this point, as of today, actually, and their clones at this point in time. And as time moves on, we're interested in many more features, such as integrating DEXs so that you can swap notifications and alerts. I mentioned sort of applications beyond DeFi, such as delegation within the graph. So we definitely don't want to restrict ourselves to within DeFi. We want to provide value to the Web3 community more broadly. And so let me just give you the ultimate vision real quick. So the graph is a platform which Web3 users can use to acquire data, right? We want agency to be able to use that data to enact intents. So eventually, in the same way that the graph empowers dApps to use data to create dashboards on their websites, let's say, we want to give our users with an agency the ability to incorporate intents into their workflows in a variety of ways. So for simple functionality, you can just use our web chat interface, which you can find at agency.xyz. For more complex things, you might favor our API, let's say for your developer or your institution of some sort. We've actually even discussed no or low code solutions that the Web3 community could use to quickly prototype new solutions. Ultimately, I want to discuss again that reinforcement learning paper about fire retardant agents and reception agents that I discussed earlier. I keep drawing this parallel between intents and reinforcement learning. And I think the problems that we're going to face while building intents, and the Web3 community more broadly than agency is going to face with intents, are actually very similar to the problems that I've been interested in throughout my reinforcement learning research. And so you have entities with different roles and responsibilities working together to do something that you care about. And there you have these problems about coordination, right? Like, how do I get these various things to work together in such a way that's cohesive and coherent, so as to solve the things that I want to, that I care about, or do the things that I want to do. And so these aren't really easy problems. There's forget modern reinforcement learning, but just classical reinforcement learning, optimal controls. There's at least a century of research on this topic. And it's still not anywhere close to being solved, let's say. But these are the problems that I've cared about for a long time. These are the problems that I've published in, and because of this, I think I'm very confident in our team's ability to actually provide these services to the Web3 community. We have this sort of foundational understanding about where the challenges are going to be in the space, let's say. So I'm also pretty excited about how within agency we'll be able to give back to the graph. So I also already mentioned how we want to spearhead the SQL and LLM data services. The goal is to build agency on the graph, right? We don't want to, right now we're using more proprietary stuff. We don't want to do that. We like the graph. We're core devs within the graph. We definitely want to use that. So once we have that SQL and LLM data service stood up within the graph, we want to transition agency to being built on the graph entirely. But at the same time, as we're developing these capabilities for the graph, other developers, other users of the graph will also be able to get the benefits, right? We want to dogfood this a little bit. So as soon as agency is able to run an LLM within the network or make a SQL query within the network, you should be able to do that too. So that's another aspect of agency that we're really excited about.
Episode 145.
And now here's Steak Machine, an indexer at the graph. During this interview, Steak Machine shared his journey into Web3 and becoming an indexer at the graph. Here, Steak Machine answers the question about what makes him optimistic about the future of the graph.
My take on the future of the graph would be that it gives an opportunity to get a lower latency to get your data in your application. So it would enhance experience of your customers because we have, as an indexers, we have all the data. And if we know what consumers need, we would optimize our stack just to serve it at a better speed.
Episode 146.
During episode 146, Anthony Zhang joined us. Anthony's a community manager for the Graph Foundation working on Asia. This is how Anthony answered the question about what types of responses or interest levels he receives when he's in Asia representing the Graph at different events and conferences.
Every time that I mention I'm from the Graph, I have a good vibes and good excitement coming out of people who in these conferences that I go to, because the Graph is a rather complicated protocol compared to others to understand. So people who are interested in it are mostly advanced crypto users or Web3 users. And they come to me and wanted to know what's going on in the Graph nowadays, what's new. And I'm very excited for what's going to happen next year because of the Sunrise, because of what semiotic AI is doing with the natural language querying. I think these things are going to make the network more active and lower down the barriers of entry for people to participate in the Graph. And especially for countries in Asia where English is not a dominant language and information doesn't go straight into the communities and needs translation and stuff. The advancements we're making on the protocol level to make it more friendly for people to get into it. And that's what's going to make my job easier and what's going to make the community more engaging with our protocol. So I'm very excited about that.
Episode 147.
And from episode 147, here's Mujtaba Idris with Deutsche Telekom, a new indexer at the Graph. Deutsche Telekom is a well-known international Web 2 company that focuses on infrastructure. Here, Mujtaba talks about the decision Deutsche Telekom's team made in going to work as an indexer on the Graph and what his initial impressions were of the protocol.
before I go into the graph, I think I'll just start from a funny story. So when we started the blockchain department, we, of course, I'm talking about 2017 and 18. Okay, now this is a cool story. We need to sell it somehow. We went to our corporate customers and told them, do you need some blockchain? And we can provide a blockchain service. And the customer asked, okay, is there an API for this? We need a blockchain API. And of course, we explained to them that this is not how it works. You cannot get an API for the blockchain. Then it will become a centralized, because then we will be providing you the data, right? There is no decentralized way to provide that kind of data. And it's not like an API you can make a get set call. You need to do it from your own wallet and stuff. So, but we always used to get that query of providing the API and stuff. But we used to laugh it off actually at that time. And then in 2021, we saw a huge, some API providers popping up, right? Morales and Immutable X, and they were actually providing these API layers. And we were like, what the fuck? Now there are some things that are providing API on top of blockchain. So but I think the need for blockchain data was always there, and we were experiencing it in one way or another. We also explored it a little bit, and along the same time, we also got introduced to the graph. And I guess once we saw the graph, we were pretty fascinated by it, because we realized that, okay, that's the right way to provide blockchain data, right? Also, structured blockchain data for various use cases. So you can structure the data according to the use case that you have, and then provide use it for analytics, let's say, and run these kind of GraphQL functions or aggregation functions on top of it. So this makes a lot of sense, and especially when we now have off-chain integration in the blockchain smart contracts as well. For example, IPFS data is also there now. So thinking about a simple NFT use case, when there's also image and a lot of metadata that is coming from IPFS or some cloud centralized sources, then there's always a chance of rug pulling as well. So you can also write smart subgraphs that kind of integrate that data, the metadata from the IPFS as well, and then you can structure it and index it in a way that it is always available, even if you're rug pulled. So this was kind of pretty fascinating and interesting for us. So once we went deep into the use cases, we knew that we have to run the indexer. And of course, as I said, that if we see ourselves as a reliable infrastructure provider, this is our goal, right? To become the biggest infrastructure provider in the blockchain space, right? In a decentralized way, of course. So Graphs makes a lot of sense. We are trying to diversify in various sorts of infrastructure. So for example, right now it is Oracle or validation or indexing. In future, it could be rollups, or it could be something else like peer-to-peer communication, like wallet-to-wallet communication nodes or whatever. But generally, there are different sorts of infrastructure out there. And of course, Graph is a unique protocol in that sense. And I think one of the biggest one when it comes to data, providing data. So we have to be there. This was our initial idea, that we have to be there. And this year, we actually made it our main focus. We're also, of course, focusing on other things, but the graph was, of course, definitely on our strategy and is still on our strategy. And we also believe that there is a lot of Web2 data that can come on the graph. So there is, now when we talk about, I was also talking to some guys from Agile Node about this as well, that when we say that we need to index Web3 data, why not index Web2 data? When you say you have to become Google of blockchain, why don't become Google, decentralized Google of also Web2 data, right? So there is a huge potential that we see. And at this point, I don't think it's only about providing blockchain data in an effective or efficient way. I think it's more about, this is a very nice data infrastructure that's there. You can provide structured data in different use cases. So I think this is, and this protocol could scale. And I think it's generally, it's about time that we scale the decentralized protocols also to the Web2 world, because the data is the king here, right? There are, in Web2 world, for example, there are thousands or in huge use cases of data analytics and stuff. So of course, we need to think about data infrastructure generally in a decentralized way as well. So maybe next would also be Web2 data on the graphs. But this is more like a philosophical discussion that I've been having with the Agile Node guys off and on. We call this Web2 vampire attack. So basically it was a joke between me and Simon actually. So so it's we can actually do a vampire attack, right? And suck all the data from the Web2 world and also put it on chain. And I think the tokenomics is also great for the graph because I think the amount of fees that we pay in order to consume data from other APIs, GRT is also, of course, it's sponsored by the protocol itself, but also in the long run, it will not be that expensive. So the Q rates will also remain low. And of course, if the tokenomic makes sense, I guess this is the way to go. And I personally think graph is and will be much, much, much more relevant in the coming days, especially with AI now. And you need a lot of data on AI, to train all these LLM programs. And of course, there will be also other kind of AI coming up in the future. Right now, we have main focus on LLMs, but maybe other sorts of use cases are popping up already, by the way. So, of course, this data will become like more and more relevant, especially with Web2 systems now trying to block data. I mean, maybe you've noticed all these Web2 systems have now introduced paywalls around the data. Like Medium has introduced a paywall. Twitter is also making these Twitter APIs more and more inaccessible and stuff. So I think it makes more sense that the graph is providing the data in a most efficient way. And especially with blockchain data is already open source. The only thing we can do is to structure it, and so that somebody can make sense of it, or whoever wants, they can make sense of this data. And I think this will be relevant in the next years to come. And we are personally very excited about the graph and excited about the fact that we are able to run index nodes on the graph network as well.
Episode 148.
And now from episode 148, here's Zach Burns with Edge and Node. Zach joined the podcast to talk about the new initiative called Horizon. This is Zach talking about where the ideas for Horizon came from and the process he went through in shaping the initiative.
So I started working on Horizon in earnest, let's say, in about March of this year. At the time, I was looking at a lot of protocol mechanisms and leveraging a lot of criticism internally about things that I thought were working or not working. I just had been bothered for a long time that I felt like a lot of things that we were doing weren't working, but what kind of killed me inside was just, I thought there could be a version that does work, and I really wanted to deliver on our mission. And so I was talking about this with Giannis, and he gave me the green flag to go design something. So I spent 2 weeks back in March, starting with the first version of Horizon was just, let me list out all the problems that I see. And what if I go fix those problems individually, and then kind of where do we end up with? A second iteration of Horizon then took that and tied together a common theme of what the different data services are going to need in the future, which is sort of response to the world of data services. And then yet a third iteration was adding something which is the modularity of the protocol. And that's really when I think what people think of when we talk about Horizon really took shape as sort of a pluralistic design for the graph, where you can build up new data services out of different building blocks, like different payment systems, different verifiability mechanisms, or different needs for security. You can take all these things because all the data services have actually different needs. They do differ in these respects, but have a common, core protocol that serves the needs of those multiple data services. And so that's kind of how Horizon came to be.
And that's a wrap for 2023. Thank you for making it such an amazing year. Next week, we'll be back with new episodes of the podcast to start 2024, a year that already promises to be something special for the graph in Web3. This has been a production of the GRTiQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review.
GRTiQ
Podcast.